Welcome to the Heart of Education podcast. Join Rock as your guide on his journey to reawaken the hearts of parents and children to the love of learning and to draw wisdom from within. In each episode, we will learn together from other revolutionary parents, teachers, and guides about their journey towards the heart of education. Come join the revolution for education.
Hello, and welcome to the third episode of The Heart of Education. I'm your host, Rock. Today, we are going to be talking to Mr. Brett Pike about an education that is worthy of freedom, and also about some of the systems that we encounter in education and beyond. You can follow Mr. Brett at Classical Learner on TikTok and also Instagram. Please also consider supporting him in his Homeschool Connected Discord community, and also buy his children's books that he's written, Cubs the Bears, on Amazon and other places where books are sold. Thank you, and let's jump right into it.
Hey.
How's it going, Rock?
Good. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I hear you. Just lighting a candle.
Got it.
A lot of mosquitoes around here.
Oh, wow. Yes. That season's already started, I see.
And I got this one bee stuck in here.
Uh-oh.
When you have the Southern life, everything wants to kill you. So
Well,
everything's venomous, everything's bigger, badder. Even the grass, like when I was up north, you would put a water toy on the grass, your kid's water toy, and at the end of the day, the grass would be dead. But in the South, nothing kills the grass. You could light it on fire and it laughs at you. So the South is the real deal.
Yeah, I have some experience with mosquitoes growing up in Taiwan for a bit. So, tropical island. You know, imagine Hawaii, but with a lot more mosquitoes and crazy typhoons and cold winters.
Yes, I don't know about any of that, but that sounds intense. It sounds intense.
Well, you know, every summer we have a typhoon. You know, you get used to it.
That's just now typhoon is just a fancy word for a hurricane.
Yeah, it's just a different type. You know, I'm not really sure about the technical terms of science because, you know, at the end of the day, science is man-made, and, you know, we classify things however we want. That makes sense. You know, it's supposed to make sense, right? Like Pluto was a planet when I was a kid. I think I just aged myself, but
Well, what really matters is how we teach the children science, and from what I ascertain, that's your specialty. So why don't you jump?
It is one of my
and tell
specialties.
us a little bit about, you know, what you do and how that works, because you did send me some of your curriculum, and I did part of it with my son. It was pretty cool. And
oh, thank you.
you know, I like to see educators that break free from the system and do their own thing. You know, we all might come from different backgrounds, different perspectives of how to go about doing that. But the more people that break free from that control system, the more options that gives families. And ultimately, it's families having options which allow us to win in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, you know, I come from, this is my 11th year now teaching. My gosh, it's been a while. But half that time I was a STEM teacher. The other half I was a math and science teacher. And, you know, I could say I fell right into STEM because I was told to basically take over a class at a charter high school out in South Central LA. So I was told to take over this, it was called Mesa, but basically it's the same thing as STEM. It was this class where the kids were building like a mousetrap card. They're doing presentations. There was a egg drop challenge that they did with like other high schools. So it was a competition class. Like the point of the class is to go to these competitions. And midway through the semester of my first year at the charter school, the principal just pulled me and said, "Hey, Rock, I know we're going on winter break. You want to take over the class?" And of course I said, "Sure," because I don't have tenure. And, you know, and on the inside, I'm sweating. I'm like, isn't that teacher who was teaching that class the engineer, like the retired engineer who just decided to become a teacher? Like, what's up with this? Like, I am not the expert at this at all. You know, I majored in psychology in college. So, you know, I knew how to put up a good facade. Like, yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll take over the class. No problem. On the inside, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with these kids. And through trial and error, it just things came about. And what I realized, and this is the biggest thing about, I think, STEM and just also, even parenting in general is like, what does failure mean to you? I think a lot of parents are not giving themselves enough credit for being great teachers because if and I just had a daughter last year, and she's 10 months now, cutest thing in the world, but I'm a parent, I'm biased. What I'm learning is that, oh my gosh, I'm teaching this child everything, right? How to hold a spoon, how to go to the potty, don't touch that. That could be dangerous, right? And parents are natural teachers, and I think that we as a society have given a little too much, we haven't given parents enough credit is what I'm trying to say. So going back to my story, the way I really ran this class is the way I run things now is just, I let them figure it out. I get off the stage. I'm not a sage on a stage anymore. I'm going to guide on the side. And that has really given ownership of the learning to the students where, I still give them support. So the way I give them support is, okay, when I got to the class, I said, all right, who's interested in building a mousetrap car? Kids raise their hand. Who's interested in doing the egg drop challenge? Kids raise their hand. Okay, cool. Here are some YouTube videos to get you started, right? Just some basic tutorials, stuff, whatever. And I told the kids, like, whatever materials you want to bring to class, let's just bring them because we're on a low budget. And they just sat there and they figured it out with very minimal, I want to say, not a lot of help from me, to be honest. They learned very quickly, like, okay, when you build a mousetrap car, you need better wheels than just the CDs. If you remember those, remember CDs?
Yeah.
And so they learned quickly what materials work the best by trial and error. They just sat there all day and they kind of just play with things and they figured it out. And our first year, I remember we went to the competitions with all these other schools that have like team uniform. They were from much bigger high schools. My charter high school was, I think, 300 students on a good day. I think that was it. It was a very tiny school. Out of it, that was renting a church building basically, Monday through Saturday or Monday through Friday, and we won. We placed and we went to like the semifinals of the competitions, and then
that's awesome.
I was like, wow, yeah. And from there, that's where a lot of my STEM stuff grew from. And during the pandemic, I realized I never met a happy parent. I never met a happy parent during this time. When we're doing online school and with all the things that are going on. So I created my own STEM curriculum, but now I'm also starting this podcast because I realized, I have all the stuff I learned in STEM and in parenting, and the journey that I've been on parenting is like, I want to share that with everyone because I realized, what I learned in STEM is not just for STEM or homeschool. It can be applied to life, like what I said, it's like when you give ownership of learning to the kids, and I feel like in homeschooling, a lot of times, a lot of homeschoolers, when they first start, they start with like, they want to copy everything that, what they did in public school because that's most likely where they came from, right? And it's like that journey of like breaking away from that model, right? That where I think true transformation really happens, right? You're not just taught the way you learned. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I like how you talk about ownership over their learning, and you talk about how when you gave the children the assignment, whether that's building a mousetrap car or whatever it might be, you really just pointed them in the right direction. And so much of what's wrong with public schools and the way education is viewed in our culture in general is that it's all focused on outcome. But really what matters is the process of learning. And you could take any person or any child, it doesn't really matter, and you can say in 3 weeks, you're going to have a test on this. And I need you to cram, and I need you to study and memorize. And 3 weeks from now, you can regurgitate back what was in a document or what I said to you. Well, now you're said to be smart. But that information goes in one ear and out the other. And if you ask the child that 2 years from now, they're not going to know it anyway. But the process of learning, that taking the time to do trial and error, to figure out how do I construct that mousetrap car, that is the type of knowledge that's like riding a bike. That's the type of knowledge, the process of learning how to learn, that will stay with the child for a lifetime. And I like that your focus is on STEM. So for parents that really aren't familiar with what that is, what is STEM? What is STEM?
STEM is just another buzzword that they try to get you to go to their school. Okay, but in all seriousness, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's recycled, really. I mean, if you think about back in the 60s and whatnot, they had a space race, right, with U.S. versus Russia. So they really emphasized science. They really tried to pull, as a nation, we were trying to win a space race. So we wanted the kids, right, to get really interested in science, which is cool in a way. Minus all the other stuff that you talk about, I believe, with the government and whatnot, but space program, right? And now we are seeing kind of.
That's what you're saying. I don't know if that's what you're saying, but
history repeats itself. Here we are, right, in 2022, and we have all these other countries. You hear about Russia hacking us and all these other things. So I feel like there's another push for STEM. And what's interesting now is that mainstream media is catching up to, STEM is cool. Everything that was nerdy when I was a kid is now also considered cool. It's funny how the cycle goes, right? Like the Marvel has made Iron Man, right? Like the pop culture idea of STEM now is like, oh, it's Iron Man. It's like, well, sure, I'll ride with that because we're just riding with the wave. And so STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, is very broad. You can cover from anywhere from like plumber to rocket scientists to doctors, tradesman, electrician, the construction. Any of that can be honestly can be categorized under STEM, to be honest. If that helps.
So ultimately, STEM is the process of a child learning how to physically construct things, physically build things with their hands. And that could include making chemical reactions and things of that nature. But they are learning to conquer the physical world around them, not just in educational theory, but they're learning how to do things with their hands.
Yeah, I mean, STEM at the end of the day is problem solving. There's a real world problem that you have to now solve, right? And I bring my students through like the engineering design process. That's a big key process that you bring them through, because regardless of what lessons you're using, like it doesn't matter if it's a mousetrap car, if you build a boat, if you build a shelf, right? You're learning the learning process is still the same. It's you draft the design, you prototype, you build something to try to solve the problem. Did it work? Well, if it didn't, go back to the drawing board, and the cycle. And that's the key part is, regardless of how things change, right? Because we all know technology changes rapidly nowadays, especially, right? I can't keep up most of the time now sometimes with the kids, like the new stuff, cryptocurrency and all those other things. But one thing that's when we have to look at the mindset, right? Mindsets don't change. The engineering engineering process is still run today as it was like years and decades ago, just with different technology, right? People were hand drawing, blueprints back then. Now we're using computers, right, to, do the same thing. But the mindset behind it and the training behind it is still the same thing. Ultimately, it's, part of it is it's half creativity, half of it is, a bunch of processes that you learn as you go through it.
Yeah, I mean, STEM falls in line with what I call creative excellence, in that you're giving children the ability to take what's in their mind and produce it into physical reality. And once a child has the ability to do that, they have the key to unlock the potential within their imagination, within their creative mind. And then as a parent, once they have those skills, there's so much you can do. You take a child who could make a car out of a mousetrap, or could build a garden box, or do anything of that nature, and I could then take that skill that child has developed and use it to get them real world experience. I can use that to get them entrepreneurial experience. I can use that to get them employment if that's the route we want to go for a specific reason. And I always tell parents, if you're going to have your child get a job, don't just have them get a job to get a job. Have them get a job that is specifically designed to give them more skills. And STEM is a great start to that process. And that's why I like when you approached me to show me what you were doing. I do think it's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. and I go back to what I said about the parents is like I think a lot of parents have these trauma from the educational system, right? I wasn't good at math. I wasn't good at science, whatever it is, that story is in your head, right? And now you are in a situation where you're trying to teach your child, and, in your mind, you're like, I have to have all the answers. It's like, no, you don't. The honest truth is you don't have to have all the answers. If you're just willing to learn with your child, your experience is going to be so much better. Just like I didn't force myself to have all the answers. I didn't have to know how to build the best, perfect mousetrap card before I even taught it to the kids, right? I just, okay, let's look this up. All right, let's try it out. Let's see if it actually works, just like the video said, or whatever we found on Google. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, parents, a lot of parents do put pressure on themselves. They feel like they don't have experience with this or knowledge in this area. But the whole mindset is wrong because, again, they're thinking about outcome. And they might not know how to do something, but that's, in a way, even more valuable because you can demonstrate, right, through actions. You can demonstrate the process of learning. And this is how we go about figuring out how to build a mousetrap, or this is how we go about learning how to learn chemistry, learning how to do chemistry or whatever it might be. And it's the process of learning that will ultimately free your child. I always tell parents, a worthy education focuses on 3 points. You want your children to be critical thinkers, right? That's the process of learning. You want your children to have skills to be able, to be able to do things in the real world, to produce physical things. And you want your children to have entrepreneurial childhood. You want them to have entrepreneurial experience. Well, the STEM, why I am passionate about it. One of the companies I actually get for my son is Cubico Science, and they deliver different STEM projects to our house every month. And just this week, my son and I, we built a lung, right, a replica of a human lung, and he was able to visualize how a human lung actually works with a water bottle, some balloon, and a straw. And he also engineered a marble out of wood. And to see the wonder on his face, accomplishment, knowing that he figured out how to do that as he's developing that skill of creating things in the real world, that's what a real education is. And that's the power of science, technology, and mathematics.
Yeah, because I think so many parents they have this notion in your head, like, if I get the wrong answer, what does that mean to me? Like when they start teaching the kids, like, what if I'm wrong, right? What if my kids are wrong? They're like you said, they're focused on the outcome rather than the process of learning, the journey of learning. They're so worried about, like, I got to get to that right answer because of what it meant to them, back in public schools, like, you got to get the right answer. You got to, if you don't, you're going to fail. And then, the message that whatever is story that's playing in their head as they're trying to teach your child, they're like, I want to get the right answer so that my child doesn't, end up the way I did or whatever. And I think parents need to stop and just take a deep breath and say, hey, what am I focused on here, right? Is it about me or is it about, your child learning this thing? Because your child probably never encountered this, whatever it is, right? And you might not have, but that's okay. It's the fear of the unknown that I feel like I get from a lot of parents, especially when they come to my class. They're like, oh, they feel a little bit more like, oh, wow, this is cool stuff, and they're excited. But then if I told them to go home and do this at home with their kids, they would be like, nope, that's your expertise. I'm like, okay, I wasn't the expert at first. I had to figure this all out. And I can tell you honestly, most of my students probably by the end of the year know how to do things better than I do, 100%, which is what you want anyways, right?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do, and I really make a point of it, is I always point out to my son when I'm wrong. And I say, oh, look, this was wrong. I point out that I'm glad and that I learned something new, because one of the things we really want to do is keep our children, their minds open to taking on new information. And rather than saying, this is what we believe about this or whatever it might be, it's allowing them to explore these different areas, to ask questions and try to find the answers. And ultimately, that's the skill. Right? That's the critical thinking skill that'll make them very powerful in their life. Because when you take a child and you give them that critical thinking, and you give them those STEM type of skills, whether that's construction, engineering, mathematics, whether that's art, whether that's music, whether that's computer coding, any of these type of skills, you give them some entrepreneurial child. What happens when they're 15 years old? What happens when they're 16 years old? And now they have their own interests and they see opportunities that other people don't in those areas, and they have the critical thinking faculties to explore them. What's up, Brady? I don't know where you threw it. You have to. Where's the last place you saw it? My son lost his boomerang. He has two boomerangs, mind you, because he had the one, and we were outside throwing the boomerang in the front yard, and the neighbor actually came out and gave him a second boomerang an hour ago. And that's the wonder of living in the South. Your neighbors are they're such phenomenal people here. It's really nice.
Awesome. Let's see. So you point out, oh, well, shoot, I lost my track of my thought. Let's see here. So parents are focused on, I think, the outcome, right? And you have pointed out that, yeah, okay, there we go. So the question, the real question, right, is what does the failure mean to the parent, right, and to the child? Because you're modeling, right, not just like critical thinking skills, but you're also modeling in a way character. You know, like what happens when you encounter failure? Like, how do you react to it, right? What do you tell yourself about the failure? Is it I failed, or is it just the result? The thing I tried didn't work, right? It's about separating yourself almost from the failure, like saying, okay, I did something that wasn't effective. How can I make this more effective, right? Rather than just saying, oh, like you are your test grade. Does that make sense? Like a lot of parents feel like they're grading themselves, really. Like they're grading themselves on whether or not the child got it, you know, or how fast they got something sometimes.
It's like anything else. Ultimately, as a parent, you want to create a culture and you want to lead by example. You might have the parent that tells their child not to drink alcohol, but if they come home and every day they see dad getting drunk, well, you know, your actions are saying something different and probably going to drink alcohol. Well, how do you handle failure? How do you go about learning new information? How do you handle frustration? How do you react when you realize you're wrong? Do you admit you are wrong? When you make a mistake, do you blame other people? Do you take responsibility? Because children are watching all the time. And that's why, as a father, I always make it a point to point out when I'm wrong. And I always make it a point to take personal responsibility when something goes wrong. I say to my wife, I say to my children in front of them, that's daddy's fault, and now I'm going to correct it. Because personal responsibility is a big thing. And whenever anything happens in our house where someone does something wrong or whatever it might be, we always say, take personal responsibility, do the right thing, take personal responsibility. And the more you model positive behaviors, the more your children will hopefully pick them up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me this. What are three, or let's start with one, but concrete examples of STEM projects that you've put together for children or that you have in your curriculum? So projects where children are physically building things with their hands.
Yeah, so, you know, the cool thing about STEM is like there's just so much stuff. I couldn't cram it all into the curriculum. So how about I talk about stuff that I actually do with my students every day? Would that be cool?
Yeah.
All right. So actually, I'll take a little bit of a different take on this. Let me see. So, as you may know, I teach computer science. And one of the projects that I do with the kids is actually very entrepreneurial minded. So what it is they identify a world problem, a real world problem, right? They come up with an app, like a phone app, that can solve that problem. And their whole goal is to not only just, you know, like draw the app and, you know, give me some details about how it works, what data does it process, all that jazz, But at the end of the project, their summation is they present their app to the class, right? They're trying to sell it like on a Shark Tank episode. I actually showed them Shark Tank episodes where people have gone on to sell like their app idea to the sharks, and so I make it very similar to that as much as I can. And so they're sitting there, and it's a group project, so they had to sit there, and I tell them, I guarantee you, whatever interests you all have, there's a problem there that can be solved. Whether it's skateboarding, whether it's homework, because that's a pretty common one that kids come in with. I think the most creative app I've seen come out of this project was Uber for people in wheelchairs. Because so often, like the cabs and ride-hailing services aren't meant for people who may be in a wheelchair or have crutches and whatnot. And so they said, well, why not make an app where people on a wheelchair can call for a ride, right, anywhere and increase their mobility. I'm like, I didn't even think about that. That was a brilliant example of like, there's a real world need. Let's come up with something that can potentially solve this problem. And I almost guarantee you, if they pitch that idea, someone in Silicon Valley might have taken it up. So that's an example.
Yeah, I like that, and it involves them using their creative faculties and putting together a proposal, sales pitch. And like sales and marketing and those type of skills are so important. One of the other things you can do with that type of assignment is something called the theory of access. So you can take it further, where on the one hand, they put together their app, and then what you could have them do from here. Hey, mister. What's going on?
Dad,
Yeah.
so I want to something.
What do you want to tell me?
Am I supposed to have my soccer ball? So could you get the
I see the ball stuff. How did it get there?
I think the boomerang up there.
Oh, did someone throw the ball in the boomerang tree?
I think I just and started the ball in the section.
All right, I'll tell you what. Daddy's going to be done in 2 minutes, and I'll come get it. I'll do my best to get him, but I might need the floor.
Okay, I haven't. I'll be right back.
Yeah, see if you can get it. See.
I'm just going to get the soccer. Okay?
All right, I want to see how you do it.
Just
I'm watching. Go.
you have to grab it and shake your
I'm
teeth.
going to report what you do to the people. So, all right, so we were talking about your class and how you have students create an app. And one of the things that I do with young people is have them practice theory of access. And what I would do is a step further. First, I would do their mock presentation, and then I would give a bonus assignment when it's their job to either get on a phone, get on an email, make an original video in an attempt to get into contact with a person who works at one of these companies and attempts to pitch what they're doing to that person. And, obviously with an app like that, there's no infrastructure built out, right? But just the experience of having your students attempt to get into contact with a person who can make a decision is a great experience. It's a mindset development. Okay, you have this idea. Now, what are your impediments to producing that in physical reality? And can you track down someone's email or whatever it might be? One of the funnest things I did with my son is he was looking at one of his Melissa and Doug toys. And so he was looking at Melissa and Doug toys, and he wanted to about manufacturing it. And I actually called Melissa and Doug, and he was on the phone with the company. And he's 4 years old and asking them questions, and I'm just cracking up on the side. And they're asking him questions. They're like, so what do you mean? And he was like, well, how do you make it? And they're talking to him. And then I picked up the phone. I was like, thank you for talking to my son. That was really awesome. I see, I'm watching. All right, you get it now. So with everything you do with children, you could always build upon that and do something else. And That's what I try to communicate to parents, that you start with project-based learning. You start with, okay, here's your project, and I want you to build this app. And then you take it a step further. Say, how can you get in contact with a decision maker? Or are there apps available in which you can build out an idea on top of, right? Because there might be apps for that. Or can you do a website version of this, or a small scale version of this for people at a local nursing home, right? And can you set something up that way, you know, and you just have them think outside the box and do things that children don't ordinarily do. In the same vein, the same idea that you said at the beginning, which if you want a child, you give them an assignment, I want you to build a car out of a mousetrap. All right, now here's a YouTube video. I want you to watch that video and figure out from there, how can you go about building that car? It's all the same concept, that you're building on what your children are already doing.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. And, you know, there are actually app building, like there are some websites where they allow you to build your app for free. So that is definitely a possibility, actually. I just found out recently.
Yeah, and you know, that's the thing. Like, as you're working with a child or a homeschool parent, you want to expose children to the different types of things that people do in this world. Because the truth of the matter is, most college majors, I mean, most college students don't even declare a major for the first 2 years they're in college, some even longer, and they're taking out all this debt. People just have no idea what type of opportunities there are in the world. So, for example, we're doing a year-long nature unit study in Homeschool Connected, and the students have been doing all types of projects, STEM-type activities. They've been constructing their own garden boxes, building their own ladybug feeders, making bumblebee bags, all different types of things where they're building things out of wood. They're learning to produce in the real world. And with each lesson, I do a little class that I film with students. And this past week, we went over different options they have in terms of selling things they make out of wood online. And many of the children are 7, 8 years old, but that's fun. So what they've done is they've built their own ladybug feeders, which are really cool things out of wood. They're kind of like birdhouses, but ladybugs. And then what we had them do is do research onto Etsy. And the assignment was that if you enjoy making the ladybug feeder or doing something like that, to attempt to sell it on Etsy or the Facebook Marketplace. And, you know, we go over things like that all the time. We've gone over how they could get a table at a flea market or a farmer's market. And when you start to show children these different type of opportunities, whether it's that, whether it is contracting on Fiverr.com if you're an artist, right? All these different things that I didn't figure out you could do until I was in my late 20s. You expose children to this at a young age, right? You take a child who's good at art and you say, did you know there are sites like Printfly.com, and we could take your art and we can put it on t-shirts right now, and you can sell your t-shirt, and when they sell, you'll actually get physical money. So it's tangible, like, wow, I really accomplished something. I made this t-shirt and people found it interesting enough that they bought my t-shirt. And the mindset you're creating, the experience you're giving them, ultimately will benefit them in ways you can't plan for, because you just don't know what opportunities they'll see as they advance.
Yeah, let me ask you this: why is the entrepreneurship it seems like the entrepreneurship is the end result of a lot of your lessons? So I'm just curious as to why that is.
Well, I see the world. I see the world we're living in, and in the last 2 years, I have seen that the system, we'll call it. Oh, you're having trouble getting the ball down?
Yeah, now it's in there.
Did you use a broom?
But the pokey is pokey stuff. Pokey, not what.
Oh, there's thorns? All right, I'll tell you, I will get it for you in 5 minutes, but I do have to.
Poop.
Poop? There is poop. Thank you. There's a poop. That's the life of a homesteader. Give me 5 minutes, but Daddy has to finish this interview, okay? I know. All right, so where were we? We were talking about entrepreneurial stuff. So when I see the world and I see the system using financial leverage to control people, I say that working for a corporation is no longer something your children could rely on. Because regardless of how you feel about what's happened in the world in the last 2 years, 3 years, regardless whether you trust a certain industry that you're not allowed to talk about online or not, everyone should be concerned. Everyone should be disturbed, really, by the system telling people that they can't work unless they submit to procedures that they might not be comfortable with. That's not a position I want my child, Brady, to ever be in, right? That's not a position I want my brother to be in, I want my sister to be in, I would want my mother to be in. So when we're educating children for the world, we have to educate them for the world they're growing up in and not the world we grew up in. And the world they're growing up in is this kind of fascistic partnerships between corporations and the government. You see that on social media itself, in which the social media companies will align with the government and they're saying there's certain things that you're not allowed to question. This is doctrine. And if you question it, you're not allowed in the public conversation, right? So the world is changing and we have to change with it. An education worthy of freedom. And the way we do that, the marker of that, is your child capable of living a free and independent life when they're 18 years old. They cannot be reliant on the government. They cannot be reliant on corporations. They should not even be reliant on you as the parent. And the way we do that, and I beat it like a dead horse, is we give our children critical thinking faculties. We make sure they have real skills which they can produce. That's why I love the STEM, in which they can produce what's in their mind, get into physical reality. We give them a childhood filled with entrepreneurial experience so that they develop a winning mindset, a mindset of abundance. They see there are opportunities everywhere in this world, and there are opportunities everywhere in this world, and they actually have the experience with experience, knowledge, of how to actually go about pursuing whatever it is they want to pursue. And when you combine those three things, that's a recipe for an education worthy of freedom. And yes, other things go into that. Like people, I get the most traction. I get less traction when I talk about the education. I get the most traction when I talk about the manipulation in the world. When I talk about, right, I have a degree in history, and one of the things I really study, and I've studied a lot, is propaganda. And people love when I talk about propaganda, right? You read my books, and you can see that I have a deep understanding of how propaganda works. And that's great, and that's the great. I even teach a course in Homeschools Connected for children, elementary and middle school, using the Cubs to Bears children book series, which I wrote, to teach children how to identify propaganda, be familiar with it, right? People love that stuff. They love when I talk about our rights and I talk about the Bill of Rights. They love when I talk about Paul Revere and say that everyone knows that Paul Revere said the British are coming. What they didn't know is that the British were coming under order from the king to confiscate all of the firearms in Massachusetts, right? And that's why the Second Amendment is relevant, and your children should know that. And people love when I talk about the conspiracies. They love when I talk about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which the government lied about and used that to start the Vietnam War, right? They love when I talk about babies and incubators, where the government had a 15-year-old girl, probably 15, testify in front of Congress on national television, crying and saying, Iraqi soldiers took babies out of incubators, put them on the floor, and left them to die, right? And they use that to start the Gulf War. And people love when I talk about these things. And that's what gets me the most traction. And your children need to know that stuff. I teach children that stuff. I teach a course on the American Revolution and the Bill of Rights. I teach a course on propaganda. I teach a course on the media-industrial complex. But the truth of the matter is, although your children need to know that stuff, and that stuff is very important, they do need to know, because if they don't, they could be manipulated into doing things that are not so good for them. ultimately, what frees a person is skills. The most powerful thing I do is our year-long nature unit study, in which the children are learning about geography. They're learning to use a compass, north, east, south, and west. They are learning to track the sun in the sky, that the sun is actually a clock, and they use the sun and the stars to their advantage. They are learning how to build. They're building their own greenhouses, right? STEM, building their own greenhouses, starting seedlings inside, learning how to do research. How do you figure out what plants grow in your growing zone? To start growing those plants, to figure out which part of your yard gets the sun for the most amount of hours, to build a garden in that part of the yard, and not just build a garden, but to actually physically construct garden boxes out of wood, so that they're learning the skills of carpentry. All the while, they're learning about photosynthesis. They are learning about soil biology and fungus and bacteria. And as they're doing this, they're composting. They're making their own worm farms. They're learning that there's certain bugs that eat your crops and will kill your food. And how do we combat that? We attract beneficial garden bugs, which is why they're making bug feeders, which is why they're making bumblebee baths, because you want to attract those bees. And then they can have context into learning about nature. So you say the bees are very important. It is a very dangerous thing when the bees start to die, because the bees play a very important role in an ecosystem. What's an ecosystem? Oh, now I can understand. An ecosystem is I need those bumblebees to land on my flower and then do some cross-pollination. That pollen gets stuck to them. Do some cross-pollination, and that will allow my fruit to grow. And then when you're learning about bees, you just take it from there. So you say, okay, you're learning about bees. Now let's learn about natural remedies. Now let's learn about actually living a healthy life. So what we do is we have them take honey, we have them take garlic, put it in a mason jar, vent it out every day for about a month, and now they've made a natural remedy that allegedly, could it be, some people have said, could even improve your ability to, let's just say, can make you stronger in the immune system, right? I have to be careful to word these things, because we live in a crazy world of psychopaths who don't like this stuff to get out, right? I mean, the idea that, being in the sun might be healthy, that used to be in common knowledge, but now that's the type of thing you're not allowed to say. But you have your children do that. You have your children, and then they want to learn about bees and where does honey come from. And you say the bees get the nectar from the plant, and then they go back to their beehive and they actually throw up into each other's mouths, and the children are like, ew, that's gross. And you're like, gross, but nature's powerful and it makes something really powerful, right? And children could understand, because they've been doing composting. Okay, so a cow's manure, a chicken's manure, that's actually a great natural resource, right? And that there are many different forms of currency. They start to understand. You say, you think you need money, but you can make money from chicken shit, right? And they start to understand why that's true. And that all of these things, you just build on it and build on it and build on it, and you're actually teaching them the skills of the world. And then with our year-long nature unit study, as they develop these skills, we're showing them, listen, you made ladybug feeders, you can sell them on Etsy, right? You can sell them on the Facebook Marketplace. You construct garden boxes, you can take flyers, and you can offer to build old people their garden box. You can make money doing that. You can donate a garden box to the local church and ask them to put a flyer over it with a picture of you and say, this garden box was donated by this boy, and if you want him to make one for you, call his mother at right? And you can start a little business building garden boxes. As the summer goes along and children plant these seeds, they've already planted them, and these crops grow at the end of the summer, you can take your crops and you can bake stuff with them, and you can have a bake sale. Or you can take those crops and you can set up a little farmer stand, and you can sell the tomatoes you grew to your neighbor, and then realize that there is abundance. You can literally create money with your mind. And that's not just something I talk about. This is something I live, right? I mean, classicallearner.com, Homeschools Connected, that came from my mind. I made that money with my mind. The Right to Bear Arms, Free Speech Social Media Censorship, Operation Mockingbird, and the Church Committee, right? Books. I physically created that. I produced the asset. I produced the money with my mind, and he can teach children how to do it. And ultimately, that's what gives children an education worthy of freedom, because it gives them the skills to live a free life.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And education should be. So it sounds like you're into the business of education is to free people.
Yeah, education. An education that doesn't free someone is worthless. It's worthless. They call what happens in public school education. Everyone knows it's indoctrination. They don't teach children real skills, but they will teach them that your ancestors are inherently bad, or you're a victim and you're an oppressor. It's like children shouldn't be exposed to any of this. They should just be taught, like Martin Luther King, to just judge each other for who they are, and they should be taught skills. But that's not what happens in public school, because they're interested in political doctrine. So they want to teach children that they want to introduce them to messaging that's really inappropriate, that they shouldn't hear from anyone but their parents. That if a guy pulled up to them in a van and showed them some of the textbooks that they show children in public school, it would probably be a felony. And they're like, oh, we should teach that to the children because they need to be tolerant. It's like, no, you shouldn't be talking to my child about that stuff. That's inappropriate. I'll talk to my child about anything related to that type of thing, because children shouldn't even know what sexuality is. They shouldn't. It's not a thing to them. That's not. And if it is, that's abuse. That's abuse if they know what that is, right? They should figure that out as they start to go through puberty, and then you can have appropriate talks about what they're going through, right? They make books on it, the birds and the bees, and this is what you're feeling. But what they're doing in these schools is they're grooming and they're indoctrinating, and everyone sees it. People are seeing it in droves. We went from 3 million homeschoolers in America 2 years ago to over 11 million homeschoolers, and people are fed up. They are sick. They are pushing back. They don't care about these losers in these school boards who tell parents that there's something wrong with them, that you're full of hate. There's something wrong with you because you don't want your child indoctrinated into our political doctrine. You just want your child to be educated. No, an education should only be judged by its ability to free a person. Are they capable of critical thinking? Do they have skills? And do they know how to live a free and independent life so they're not relying on the system? And if the answer to that is no, then that education, that diploma isn't worth the paper it's written on. And that's the truth.
Sounds like we read the same book.
Yeah.
Weapons of Mass Instruction.
Yeah, John Taylor Gatto. And Gatto pointed this out a long time ago. And he was like, listen, they're not giving your children an education worthy of freedom. I mean, Gatto was the New York City Teacher of the Year in 1988, 1989. He was the New York State Teacher of the Year in 1990. I might be off by a year, but those 3 years in a row. And he abruptly resigned. He was working at one of the poorest inner cities in New York. And by the way, I worked at one of the poorest inner cities in New York, and I was blown away when I was in a 9th grade global class, and I asked my students to point out Africa on a map. And at first, I just thought they were I was like, oh, they're not interested. They don't want to answer. And then I realized that the reason they weren't answering is because my entire class of 9th graders, not one of them had ever been shown where Africa was on the map. And I said, oh, the education system is something. It dawned on me right there. I was like, holy, whoa, this is the education system? All right. Well, Gatto was the New York State Teacher of the Year, and he abruptly resigned. And he took out a one-page ad in a newspaper, I think the New York Times, and he explained that he could no longer take part in the system, which was systemically designed to dumb people down. He went on to write the book, Dumbing Us Down. Well, here's what he was really doing when his inner city students outperformed the private schools of some of the richest private schools in the United States of America that were down the block. And his inner city students were outperforming them on standardized tests. And he later wrote on books what he was doing. And what he was doing was allowing the students to study whatever they wanted to study, to a point where he even had students that didn't have to come to class. And he had one student who was really interested in swimming pools, and he had her do a project, instead of doing his history class, do a project in which she studied swimming pools, all of the public swimming pools in New York City. And she wound up creating this elaborate map, and she wound up selling her work for $30,000, and she was in 8th or 9th grade, right? So my education of philosophy derives from God, right? It's that you should be following the interest of the child, and you can use the interest of that child to embed anything you want them to know. And it's not the indoctrinating garbage at the Department of Education, which, you know, they mask in the name of tolerance, which anyone with a brain could see they purposely do it to divide people. It's like, it's not hard to see what they're doing, right? I mean, you attack one group of people, you tell the other group of people that they're bad, the group of people you're attacking gets defensive, and before you know it, everyone's like, like, it's not hard to see. It's divide and conquer tactics. It's obvious. It's the opposite of what you do if you want to unite people, right? If they wanted to unite people, the President of the United States wouldn't go on television and say, hey, yeah, there's going to be food shortages and you better get ready. No, what he would say is, you know, we in the United States of America have faced great challenges before. And during World War II, the greatest generation were faced with challenges of which this country has seen. And people came together like Americans always have. And people created gardens in their front yards, and they built community gardens, and they fed their family and they fed their neighbor. And that's what we're going to do in the United States of America. And we're going to take every public park in America and have volunteer programs in which people from the town of any race and any background can come together and work together and do community gardens and feed your community. And people are going to start gardens in their front yard. I don't want to see grass. I want to see tomatoes. And you're going to feed your family, and you're going to feed your neighbor, and America is going to come together like we have never come together before. And that's what leadership looks like, and that's what leaders sound like when they're actually interested in uniting people. But that's the opposite of what happens in the system. And unfortunately for the system, they could silence people left and right. They could call people like me the bad man. But the truth of the matter is, people have woken up to it, and they see what the strategy is. And people are reading books like Edward Bernays' book Propaganda, and they're seeing how if you want to control the country, you divide people by these. Exactly what they do in the public school system is what Bernays laid out in his book Propaganda. This is what you do, and everyone can see it, and people are pushing back against it, and there is no going back. We are building the country that our children deserve, and we are not going to rely on the system to do it.
Amen. I agree.
But that's why what you're doing is powerful, because teaching children these skills, teaching them, that's the type of skills, those are the type of skills that free people. And those are the type of skills, and I always tell people it takes one skill to free a man. And during the last few years, when they were using financial leverage over innocent people to coerce them into doing something that violated the most basic human right, their bodily sovereignty, the most basic of human rights, people felt pressured. They felt that they had to do something that they were scared of, that they didn't feel comfortable with, right? And the reason they felt they had to do that is, one, because they were in debt, because they didn't have an education worthy of freedom. They thought to keep up with the Joneses rather than to live within their means. And if you want to be free, you have to live within your means. Teach that to your children. Teach that to your children. Teach that to your children. But they didn't feel like they had a fallback. And they felt, all these people all over America felt, if they didn't cover their face, if they didn't give in to the procedure, and they couldn't work, they couldn't pay their mortgage, and ultimately their family would lose the roof over their head. And if they had those skills of carpentry, of engineering, the value is intrinsic. It's not reliant on a diploma. It's not just reliant on, someone saying this or that. If you can fix a toilet, the lady down the street needs her toilet fixed, you can earn a living. And that is how we educate our children. That is how we break free from the system. And if we do that, and people homeschool their children, and then you teach them the other stuff that everyone likes to talk about, Then you teach them about propaganda. Then you teach them about their rights. Then you teach them about the church committee and the Gulf of Tonkin and all the lies of our government and all of the disgusting things our government has done and the wars they've won overseas and all of the innocent people they killed in Iraq, all of the innocent people our government has killed in Syria, and all of the innocent people our government has killed in the Middle East, all the innocent people our government has killed in Vietnam. Then when you teach your children about that, it has meaning because they're actually capable of fighting back. The system doesn't want. We will teach them. And then they'll look you in the eyes with a straight face and say, oh, you don't have a blue and gold flag? You don't have a blue and gold flag on your profile? Maybe it's because I know you're lying, right? Maybe because the world's more nuanced. Maybe because I know that the reason one country acts that way is because they're actually being threatened by you, right? And, you know, people don't understand this stuff because I can't elaborate on it, right? You're not allowed to talk about it. But once you really dig into it, you're like, oh, I see what you're doing here. You're the aggressor, right? Like, I'm not stupid, right? I actually have a degree in history. Like, I learned how to get back to primary documents, and it's not hard to figure this stuff out once you look. But they make it hard to figure this stuff out because they don't allow people to be exposed to the information. And they act like they're trying to silence one person because they're hateful or dangerous. But in reality, what they're trying to do is silence people from being exposed to information, because once people get the whole story, people are capable of waking up to how the world really works. And when they do that, the entire system, all their control, all their financial schemes, all this stuff is just financial schemes, right? These are just criminals covering their tracks. And, you know, if they let the truth out, people see that, and that's what they don't want. But they can't stop us from educating. And the bottom line is there are 11 million homeschoolers in America right now. In 20 years, people are going to see it and it's going to backfire on the system because Babylon is built on a house of cards, right? There are cracks in its foundation. And as they do what they do and the population gets lower and lower, but not the awake population, not the homesteading population, not the homeschool. You look at homeschools connected with what I do, it's amazing. People with 11 children, 9 children, 10 children, 7 children, 11 children. And that's the future. And the future belongs to people who are actually aware of how the world works. And there's no stopping it. They think, like, people are like, oh no, is this a good time to have a child? It's a better time than ever before to have a child. Because in 20 years, this will be a generation of children raised in adversity, and they will be stronger than ever. And we will take our country back.
I hear you. Wow.
I'm throwing a lot at you.
I'm taking it in. I'm listening, you know, and I'm always interested in other people's opinions, and I love having you on because, hey, you know, I need to hear it, right? You know, I'm already at that point where everything you said, I'm like, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. You know, it's not foreign to me. It's not a surprise. I'm like,
It's dark what they do to this world. It really is dark. And, like, you see why so many people have trouble mentally with what they did in the last 2 years. Because, you know, they took the population. They told people that one half of the population that, you know, something's going to get you and, you know, you should be afraid, right? They told everyone they should be afraid. And, like, that's scary when the system's telling you should be afraid. And then they have the other half of the population who are like, so you want us to give away all of the rights that make America America? And they're like, yeah, but I'm afraid. And you're like, yeah, but I'm afraid that if you take away all my rights, then the government's going to have too much power. Oh, but I'm afraid that the boogeyman's going to get me. And so they create this divide. It's brilliant. It's brilliant social engineering. It's the same thing they did with the wars in the Middle East, where first the government and the media comes along, and like 3 minutes after, you know, that whole situation on 9/11 day, right? Like 3 minutes after that, they're like, we know what happened and we know who did it. It's the boogeyman in the Middle East who we happen to have given all of their weapons and funded and trained. But it's that boogeyman in the Middle East, and it's those people that are very different than you, and they look different and have different culture and customs, right? And for years, they just bombard the public. And these are the people coming to get you. And these are the people coming to get you, right? That's under the Bush administration. Then they have Obama run. It's brilliant social engineering. they have Obama run on Hope and Change, and he comes out and says, how intolerant of all of you for looking at these people that way. You just told them, you hijacked all their emotions, all of their, I'm proud to be an American, right? And, right, you get Toby Keith, a mighty sucker punch came from somewhere in the back. As soon as we can see clearly through our big black eye, yeah, we lit up your world like the 4th of July, right? So they tap into all those emotions and say, it's these people that you don't know across the world. They're the reason for that. They get those people all jacked up. They say there are these events, right? They say there's events, right? Like, you know, where bombs go off, right? And the media, the mainstream narrative, they're saying, and the reason for that are those people with their different culture. You condition the public. Then you have the left-wing guy run, right? And he comes along, Hope and Change, and says, well, anyone who has a negative opinion of that culture, how filled to hate are you, right? You see the schism, right? You see the schism. And now, again, you have this big divide because you have the one group of people who are afraid of that group because all of the social engineering. And you have the other group of people who are like, how can you be so intolerant, right? And you create, it's brilliant, brilliant social engineering. And it's designed to divide and conquer. And they do it very well, right? And it's hard for people to see through. And, you know, I could have fallen victim to that. Like, I grew up, I used to think that stuff. I was like, you know, I grew up, I remember 9/11. I was in my 3rd grade class in New York. I was in New York. And I was in social studies class with Mr. Yassis, and he came in and he said, I have a very serious thing to tell you. And he said that the World Trade Centers were just, you know, and he blah, blah, blah. And that was 3rd period. And by 4th period, they had canceled school, and our parents had came to get us. And we go home, and the news is on, and there's these burning buildings, and the Pentagon's on fire, and the news is telling you that we're being attacked. We're under attack, right? And you're a child, and this is terrifying, right? And the news, by the way, they're telling you it's these people, right? Who I don't know anything about these people, right? They're like, it's these people, and they're bad. That's what the news is telling me, right? I remember one of the warmest feelings I ever had in my life was because I was in New York. So we were still under that attack, and we're like, what is going on here? And I was outside, and I'm looking up, and all of a sudden, United States fighter jets flew over. Fighter jets arrived in New York City, and all of a sudden, there were they were dwarfed, like they were flying low, like the ground rumbled, and all of a sudden, the United States Air Force was flying right above my head. And I remember the warmest feeling in the world because I was scared. I was a child, and all of a sudden, I felt safe, right? And then you get all the patriots proud to be an American, blah blah blah. Right? So I could have fallen victim to that trap, right? And I did for a while. I was like, oh, I don't know about those people in the Middle East, you know? Right? Well, luckily I went through my own awakening, and, you know, as you wake up, you realize like, oh, there was divide and conquer. You read the Quran, and you're like, wow, this is a beautiful document. The Quran is a beautiful document. And then you start to look into the lies of how the average Muslim lives, and you're like, wow, these people are farmers. These people are very based. God is very important to them in their life. Oh, by the way, the God they pray to is the same God I pray to, right? Like, were you trying to trick people? Because you're like, oh, they're praying to Allah. Allah is Jehovah. Allah, whatever you want to call him, right? Like, they're literally, it's the same God with a different name that they're praying to. And you're like, wow, these people are actually very much like me, right? But you see how they divide and conquer, right? Like, they could do the same thing. Like, they'll do this refugee stuff, and they'll be like, oh, they're being flooded. This is what the media will say. This is not me saying it. Crazy censorers. Like, this is not me saying it. The media will be like, they're being flooded with Muslims or Muslim refugees. Well, I don't know. When people cross the southern border, right? You don't say that America is being flooded with Christians from dangerous Christians from Mexico, right? Like, once you see that, you're like, oh, I see, right? So they're literally doing everything they can to create the fear, and then at the same time, they're saying, how dare you be intolerant? How dare you be intolerant? And they're acting like they don't want it. But in reality, this is social engineering. This is divide and conquer. This is how you control population. This is how you get populations to squabble over nonsense as they put through their actual agendas. And what are their agendas? Their agendas are smart cities. Their agendas are a certain type of tyranny which violates your sovereignty, right? Their agendas are moving to the digital dollar so that they can remake the banking system, because their Ponzi scheme that they've been running since 1913 is about to collapse, right? Because American money is debt, right? So they need war, they need all this nonsense, because that's the excuse they have to keep printing money. And as soon as they stop printing the money, they default on the debt and everything collapses. So they're doing that, and they're trying to switch over. That's why they brought in the cryptocurrency, because they're trying to switch over to the digital dollar, because once they switch over to the digital dollar, they can reset the financial system and they can extend their Ponzi scheme before the entire economy collapses. Because they have like $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities, pensions, and Social Security that they know they can pay for. Unless they switch it over, they're going to have a lot of hungry, angry people in the street, right? And apparently they're already warning us about that, so people better start gardening.
I hear you, and I see what you're saying. I mean, a lot of it is, the interesting thing about the political system in our country, at least, is like the two political parties are merely just two wings of the same bird.
Oh yeah, they're all funded by the same people, and they want the public to say Nancy Pelosi is the reason for my problems, Mitch McConnell is the reason for my problems, or Nancy, can you fix my problems? Mitch, can you fix my problems? Because by complaining to the system or by asking politicians, by the very nature of you doing that, you are tacitly admitting that you have given your power and your consent to what they're doing. When in reality, the response should be like when Joe Biden says we're going to have food shortages, your response should be, well, good thing I've been growing food, right? Like, good thing I garden, right? I'll make sure I have food. Because I don't get my power from these people, and I don't give these people my consent. Like, these people lie and cheat, steal, and run Ponzi schemes, but they don't have my consent to do what they do, and I see what they do. They hurt people, and everything they do is designed to hurt people. And of course, they mask it in benevolence, and they mask it in altruism. And the furthest thing from the truth, it's how a politician makes $250,000 a year. They make, and then you look at their net worth, and it's $500 million. Man, I should be as good at investing as you are. And I thought I was.
Well, it's easy when you're making the rules, right?
Oh, it sure is. Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's easy to be a stock investor when you're making the rules for the stocks to play by.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm an athlete, right, I can't bet on any games, which makes sense, right? People like, yeah, if you're an athlete, you're not supposed to bet on the games because you have a direct impact on the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why doesn't the same rules apply to the 50 U.S. senators and the House of Representatives? Interesting thought.
No, that's brilliant. That's profound. That's profound insight, right? It's like, why are they allowed to do insider trading? It's crazy.
Essentially,
it's crazy,
right? They know what's going to happen. They know the bills that are coming in, coming out. They know what's going to get signed and know what's not going to get signed, and for sure, they have their hand in it, right? And then while these star athletes are out there saying, well, I can't bet on the games, and that makes sense to the world, of course, right? You can't drop the ball on purpose just so you win the big bet, right? Against your own team.
No,
but yeah.
Every time Elon Musk is about to get that government contract, right? Like Tesla's about to get that government money. Well, the politicians know that, but they could still buy stocks.
Exactly. So they switch your portfolio right in time to ride the wave.
It's craziness. It's craziness.
Yes, sir. I hear you.
All right, I do have to run. I gotta go do my fatherly duties, and I better go get that boomerang out of the tree because Brady was getting pretty irritated that he was having trouble with the boomerang. So
I hear you.
He was ready to let me have it.
Oh yeah, no. My 10-month-old was calling me. She's like, "Hey, Daddy's home. Why isn't he playing with me?"
Yeah, well, get on
She
that.
knows.
Go do them. So I appreciate you having me on, and like I said, I love what you do.
Absolutely.
You know, well,
Thank you. And yeah, let's do this again sometime. All right.
cool.
All right, man. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Cheerio.
All right.